Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's an anthological. God, I'm really trying to toe a line here, and it's really difficult to talk about this movie without probably pissing some people off or sounding like an asshole.
Shameless plug. We drop our episodes every Tuesday. You can follow us on Twitter at WTAE Podcast? Question mark.
You can also search us on Facebook at WTAE Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. This is Worth the Admission Podcast. My name is B. Frank.
And I'm Travis.
And here we talk about many things, movies, TV, and the ever-changing pop culture.
Have you seen the amount of numbers that Netflix released the numbers for the first week of Bird Box, and they are large, like really large, 45 million people.
Wow.
You got to think that's a lot of accounts, and you're talking probably multiple people watching that movie on the same account. I mean, that's a lot of people that reached, and I'm quite surprised that Netflix dropped those numbers. Usually, they're so secretive on what they release as for number wise. They usually don't.
Yeah, it means something to them that so many people would watch this movie, and it means a lot to the people that they would release information and numbers about this movie.
Still doesn't matter. I mean, there's still plot holes in this movie. I mean, I'm glad people watched it. I thought it was worth watching, but 45 million people, I hope some of them aren't disappointed with that disastrous third act and the lack of an ending. Spoiler alert.
The thing is it shows that 45 million people watched it, or 45 million accounts watched it, or it was clicked on 45 million times, however they actually calculate that. But that's also just people watching it. That's not necessarily a showing of how good the movie was. It is more so how anticipated the movie was and how well they built the anticipation for it. I mean, they kind of led off of A Quiet Place and kind of presented it as a similar story, which it was. I mean, 45 million, yes, is a big number, and it is definitely something that Netflix should be proud of. But that's just the numbers. It's not the reviews or feelings behind it.
I mean, but just think of, though, how much money they put into big commercial ads for Bright. They hyped that movie a year before it came out. I think they said this was the fastest streaming or the highest streaming movie that they've had so far. I mean, that's 45 million people in a week. That's a lot. That didn't have a lot of hype behind it. It was just a couple weeks before where people started talking about this movie, and they've got 45 million people to watch in that first week. I mean, yeah, regardless, good, bad, or ugly on it, but still, I mean, they didn't hype this anywhere near as much. So it's quite surprising that a movie like this traveled word of mouth or via social media as it did, versus a movie that I believe they had a Super Bowl ad for Bright as well. And I mean, they had pushed that a year out, and they were really hyping that movie. And that didn't even come close to what Bird Box did.
I'm glad that I watched the movie, but I don't think it lived up to the anticipation I was feeling for it.
And that's kind of how you feel with a lot of these next Netflix movies. I mean, is it going to be good or is it not going to be good? I mean, sometimes there's hype on them, sometimes there's not. I understood that Sandra Bullock was in it. I just didn't know how popular it was going to be.
I think a big chunk of that, too, is Sandra Bullock and her being a part of a Netflix movie. This is the first time that they've gotten her for one of their movies, so it's something that is drawing people in regardless of the movie itself, because she hasn't really been in anything big in a while.
I mean, it's good for her because it does get her name back out there. I'm not saying that she needs it by any stretch of the imagination, but to have a movie be successful, regardless of what we think of the movie, 45 million streams, I mean, that's not wrong. That's successful. I mean, that's people watching, and that's exactly what you want. You also watched a movie that came out on Netflix this week, and I am currently watching the series, trying to catch up desperately. You watched the Black Mirror movie that just came out.
I watched Black Mirror Bandersnatch.
Let me hear a non-spoiler. What am I expecting from this? Because so far this series it's amazing and crazy at the same time.
That's kind of what the show prides itself on. Every episode is different. It's an anthological series, whereas a lot of series that are anthology based go season to season change. This is one of the few shows that goes episode to episode, and it makes it always interesting because you're never bored of something. You always get as much of the story as you're going to get in that one episode, whether it be an hour or an hour and a half. Bandersnatch is considerably different for the main reason of it being interactive. And the interactivity that you get with it is interesting because it does pose some interesting questions to you. One of them, for example, is small, like, what kind of cereal do you want? But then they kind of get heavier and heavier along the way. There are 5 different endings and a secret ending, apparently, if you can find it. The interactivity was cool, but I wouldn't want it to become more than just an every once in a while thing. Like, I have a feeling Netflix might do this more often, and it worked really well with the episode, but I hope it doesn't become a mainstream thing because it having to basically pause watching the movie and answering a question, it just brings me out of that world. I mean, it is an interesting aspect of it, and like I say, it does really work with the story that they tell, and it's obviously something that's very specific to an online type of system. They shot over 5 hours of footage, and you're going to get through an hour and a half at a time, just about. Good movie, worth the watch, definitely. But it's kind of to each their own on how they feel about the interaction part of it. I personally didn't really care for it.
We'll have to pause that conversation right now because I really want to see it and then get back to you on it. Because I don't know, I think it would be cool to see do something interactive. I think that's a different idea. When I heard about it, I was like, wow, that's really cool. The way they lead these stories in the show, I mean, you get immersed into it. I think the experiment with seeing if you would interact even a little bit further because they push those envelopes so much in the show, I think is a cool risk. I mean, if it pays off, awesome. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing one of these every once in a while. I don't think I would want to specifically every movie that they come out with or a special every year come out where it has to be interactive. But if this is a one and done deal, I think it would be really cool, and I think that would immerse you more if it's just a one time only. I mean, with the amount of work that you say that goes into it and shooting even more footage that you may or may not ever see. I mean, it's a big gamble. I mean, that's a lot more work that you're putting into it versus putting into another season, which some can argue that would be a better way to go. But ultimately, I feel it doesn't hurt anybody. I really want to see it. If I see it and it sucks, or I'm just not smart enough to get it, then I might have a different mindset. But this is just me from the wonder like source where I want everything to be good or at least enjoyable, especially something that I like.
You and I both watched a movie this week as well.
The very rare occasion where we both watched a movie, and it's even more a rare occasion when I watch the movie and then I tell you to watch it so we can talk about it. So I'm excited that we actually have a discussion on a movie that I saw not once but twice already. Very surprising. Mind you, I can see it at home, so it's a little bit easier. But we're talking about Mid90s, the Jonah Hill movie, written and directed. I really liked it. I watched it right before Christmas, and I told Be Frank about it, and I said, man, you really got to watch this. It's something different. It's hard to say, but it's one of my favorite movies of the year. And for different reasons. I mean, not just, obviously, there's not a ton of there's no special effects in it. It's an indie movie by A24. It's about skateboarding in the mid-90s, but it's so much more than that. And I'm excited for you and I to get into this a little bit and I want to know what your honest opinion is of this movie. I mean, it was a time jump for me. There's so much packed in there that made my little childhood heart so happy.
For me, the movie was good from an artistic standpoint, but not so much as an entertainment standpoint. Like, you're not going to sit down and watch this for fun. And so on that front, the movie part of it, the entertainment part of it, I don't think many people are going to really like. I did enjoy it from an artistic standpoint. I mean, it had a documentary feel, which is saying something because I'm not usually one that watches documentaries, but it was an artistic piece. It was an artistic period piece, and everything from the story and the acting and the kids and the skateboarding and the references all the way to the 4:3 aspect ratio and the camera quality. He didn't shoot this with a high def camera, not even close to what we see today. It felt like we were watching kind of a 90s movie about the 90s, shot like the 90s. Like I say, from an artistic standpoint, I really enjoyed it. But from an entertainment standpoint, it didn't really feel like my kind of movie that I'd sit down and just watch for fun.
No, I get that. I mean, it's also to see what Jonah Hill was going to do. I mean, this is his first time directing at least something major and writing something and being involved heavily because we see him just as an actor and you see him as a comedic actor and most recently with like Maniac he's tried to play a little bit more serious of a role and obviously he's been in a ton of serious roles in Wolf of Wall Street and anything like that over the last couple of years, so it was so cool to see something different. I knew this wasn't going to be everybody's cup of tea. I knew that going in because it's not a big budget movie, it's about the 90s. But I thought going into a movie that I thought was just going, you weren't sure. It's advertised as a skateboarding 90s movie. And I think you walk away with so much more. I think that's what I really liked about it. The way that these characters come off, from body language. That's how you feel in a scene, and that's directed that way. You feel them not always going with just dialogue to tell a story, but their body shows and moves the scene along. And that's what I really liked about it. I thought the in-depth of characters too. You're right. It's not a watch. For me, it's one of those weird movies where I really enjoyed it, so I would watch it multiple times because I did enjoy it. But you're right. It's not the same kind of enjoyment I would get off of watching an Avengers, Infinity War, or any other big budget movie, or even a comedy. I mean, because there's some funny parts to this that aren't really funny, but it's more cynical, and you have to have that sarcastic, dry sense of humor to get it. But overall, that's what I thought was different about it, and that's what I liked.
Well, and then an hour in, you kind of have this massive shift in the story from more of a happy with some bad, and then it just kind of gets really heavy and keeps that weight to it all the way until the last scene.
It has that heavy undertone, and that's what makes it feel so real sometimes. Because you take a kid, and we've all been kids, or most of us. I don't know how old people are that listen to this podcast, but hopefully everybody that listens to this podcast has been through that adolescent stage. And I think it's that trial and error stage. There's a scene towards the end of the movie where everybody knows there's a certain bad decision being made, and yet they all go through with it because, in that childlike sense, that's exactly what we would do. We don't know the boundaries of our own potential or safety and things like that. Like, kids don't know those things, and to see just the body language in the scene and how it progresses and moves just makes all of that sink in and be so much more real, which made the movie, I think, more authentic. I thought it felt like a mid-90s movie. I mean, it really felt like it just had a little bit more heart to it, had a little bit more of a purposeful message. And I just think that's what makes it a little bit different than most of those period correct pieces, because a lot of times they're trying to keep factually with certain things. This, it's just more pop culture references and certain things that were thrown in. They didn't take that thing so seriously, but it took more seriously the sense of the characters and the story to heart.
What I got from the movie as far as the underlying theme was that it was all about finding yourself and where you fit in and what you can do, what you can achieve with those who you fit in with.
Perfectly said. That's what makes some movies special. And obviously this movie's not going to resonate with a lot of people, and it's probably one of those movies that's going to be forgotten in that time frame. I just thought the message that came off of it was strong enough that it warranted at least being said and at least being made public and aware, because I think that story that they tell can happen anytime. It can happen today. In any kind of incarnation of time, you're going to have those same kinds of problems. And I think that made it more relevant. And I guess maybe that time period, just because of when he grew up, made more of an impact. But I still think that what it completes is a bigger scale picture.
Speaking of kind of underlying themes and the artistic value of a movie that won't necessarily see $2 billion or see as many eyes as went to go see that $2 billion movie, I'm talking about Assassination Nation. I often browse IMDb to see what's coming soon, and I also look up actors and actresses to see what they were in, what they're up to next, and I kind of find a bunch of little things. A lot of what I watch, sometimes a lot of what I'll watch is things that I just found on IMDb that I wouldn't have known otherwise, and Assassination Nation was one of those movies. It flew in low. I mean, it's also an indie movie. It got a small theatrical release, and I unfortunately wasn't able to catch it. I didn't even know that it was in theaters when it was in theaters. That's kind of how small it was. And it came out on the 18th digitally, and I finally was able to sit down and watch it. And to say it's really good or awesome is to kind of put it lower than it is. Needless to say, it's definitely worth the watch. But as an overall movie, it was an allegorical satire on today's society in many ways. It started with just a large amount of trigger warnings and then went through various quick cuts of the type of triggers that you're going to get, and there's like 20 or 25 of them. It's all about a town that gets hacked. The story made a point of making sure that people knew that it was set in Salem. And about a half hour into the movie, I realized that this was a modern telling of what the Salem witch trials would be like. Somebody hacks your phone and nobody knows who. This is where the town goes crazy. The cinematography was really cool. I'm a sucker for long shots. and it kind of utilized those well. It was fast paced and very violent, as kind of a forewarning.
I love gore, kind of first and foremost, and with a movie like Assassination Nation, it sounds like a gory enough movie for me. Could you imagine being hacked or even having a whole world that would hack? I mean, the chaos that would just ensue. For some people, people have demons and skeletons and things that they don't want people to see. Could you imagine the fear and what the lengths that people would go to do to protect that? Of course, people would start killing each other off.
That's pretty much what happens in this movie. That's what makes it so violent. People have nothing to hide anymore, so why hide what you're willing to do to keep as much private stuff private as possible?
Yeah, it's creepy how in our own little bubbles we think we're safe, but you get something like that happens or you get up right out of the comfort zone. What people are willing to do real quick, panic, the fear, just in those regards, if there's something that you don't want someone to see, but the feral, I mean that feral side of people, that aggressive side, that kill or be killed, that that do or die. It's amazing what people will do. That's why I'm excited to see this movie. You texted me about it this week, and I was quite interested. I haven't even had a chance to see the trailer yet, but it's another movie that's I'm gonna put on the list, especially because it's on DVD or on digital now, as I can just pick it up and be able to watch it at any time.
That kind of rounds out the movies that I plan on watching. Talking about the end of 2018 brings in the beginning and the whole year of 2019. A couple days ago, I asked Travis to find 3 movies, non-franchise, remake, reboot, basically 3 original contented stories, movies that were coming out in 2019 that he is excited to see. What are your 3 movies?
Okay, so this was a tough one. In a day where there's always some sort of franchise. I mean, whether it be a second movie or a third movie in. I mean, because you have Endgame, you have Star Wars Episode 9, you have Toy Story 4. I mean, there's a lot of continuations in the story. So it was hard to pick and choose. But there's actually 3 that they're definitely going to be off the beaten path. I don't think any of these, other than probably the last one, will probably do that well in box office. But I think they're very interesting concepts, and I'm excited to see them. The first one I have is a movie called Fighting with My Family. This is actually about Paige. She's a WWE superstar. The Rock actually ended up seeing a documentary about her family, which was in the wrestling business, and she got started at 13 years old. And it's a story basically about her growing up and becoming a WWE superstar and just the craziness that goes around because her family's quite off the wall. Her family is in the professional wrestling business. They own their own promotion over in the UK, which is where she's from. So it's this whole transition of moving someone, fish out of water, into a new place. You were a big fish in a small pond. Now you're a small fish in a big pond. And it's just being competitive and showing your side. And I'm really interested into that because you don't get to see a lot of these stories, especially wrestling stories. You did have the Mickey Rourke one, and I mean, your other notable one is Ready to Rumble with David Arquette. You don't have a lot of these like professional wrestling movies. I think The Wrestler took a dark side to it, and I believe like Ready to Rumble was a lighter side. I'm really interested to see more of a biopic because we're getting to the day and age where a lot of people don't care about professional wrestling, but there's a lot of great stories to be had. And I think even though she's so young, because she's only, I believe, 25 now, but her career's been going on for over a decade, so it's really going to be really interesting to see how they play it, because she still has more, she's still employed by WWE, she's still on TV every week, you still have all of these things, but to see the story of where she came from, I want to see the success of this hopefully build off to see other movies, because The Rock is in with this with his $7 production, which was a big deal. They're starting their own movie company and they're trying to get things off the ground. I thought this was going to be a really, really cool way to kind of see his side on how the wrestling business is, which we don't usually get a chance to see into. It's something that's usually cordoned off for those of you have fans, then you have wrestlers, and usually they don't interact as much, so you don't get to see that behind the scenes. You just see them as a character, not as a person. So that's my first one I'm really excited for. That's actually dropping, I believe, fairly soon. I believe that's going to be the beginning of February. My next movie I was going to talk about, this is another one. I don't believe this comes out until I believe the mid part of the year. I believe it's June or July. But this is a movie called Ford versus Ferrari. This is about the 1966 24 Hours at Le Mans. This was a big deal in motorsports history because this was the first time that an American builder came over and won the race. For that time, a lot of European cars, especially Ferrari, which was the pinnacle of the car at the time, it was such a big takedown. It showed that American technology, especially in the car world with Henry Ford, was able to come over and compete in a European sports car series, which for any gearhead or any people who love cars, it's a big deal. This is the first incarnation of what would be nowadays the Ford GT. You know, this was the GT40. This was the Ferrari killer, as they called it. From the looks of it, this movie is going to be based off of Henry Ford and one of the engineers, Klein. This is an important film because we don't necessarily get a lot of history in motorsports. You know, we get movies that are funny, or we get Talladega Nights, or you get Gone in 60 Seconds, where it's unbelievable car movies like Fast and Furious. A lot of times we don't get to tell these stories of these legends that people drive their cars every day. Henry Ford. I'm sure even if you don't drive a Ford, you know someone who does. It's one of those iconic names that you can't get away with in American history. And to be able to dive into that a little bit more, especially with like Carroll Shelby being in it or being portrayed in it, it's a lot of those American automotive legends that I'm excited to see. I want to hear about this race because this was a lot of drama. This boiled down. They had wrecked cars. They weren't going to make it to this race, and they did, and they actually ended up winning it. They didn't only win it, they placed first, second, and third in it, which was amazing. It's going to be really cool to see that on the screen, which I don't know if you saw. Chris Hemsworth had a movie out a couple years ago, an F1 movie I thought was very good. I don't think it got quite the play that I thought it
Rush,
deserved.
right?
Yep. Yeah, Rush. I really enjoyed that movie, but I also thought, to me, those are very fascinating because I don't think that drama gets told of not necessarily the hatred, but we're talking big brands. We're talking at that time, racing was growing at a very popular rate, a very quick rate. And you're seeing these cars that you were never going to see before because the technology was finally there. For the GT40 to sit only 40 inches off the ground to the roof was a very, very low car at the time. And they haven't even really gone that much further, even in today's technology. So what they were able to do in 1966, you're talking 50 years ago, what they were able to do. It's pretty remarkable. Christian Bale's in it, Matt Damon's in it. There's a big cast, and I thought that's going to be even bigger. These guys were rock stars in their own fields and creating their own legacies. So that's one I'm really excited on. I know those are the two that you didn't know much about when I sent you my list.
And honestly, for someone like me who isn't very knowledgeable about cars, it'll be nice to kind of get that untold story.
Well, this is going to be more for the general audience, and this is what I like about it. They've already had a documentary out before. I believe it's on Amazon Prime Video. So for people who have that and have general interest, can go and reference that movie because it is very fascinating. But it's still just a documentary. This is going to play more to the drama side, which obviously I'm sure things aren't going to be 100% correct because nothing is when it comes to biopics and, you know, just history movies in general. But I'm excited to see where they take this and how they ramp up animosity and they ramp up trying to build and compete because at that time it was very difficult, very expensive. That's what I'm excited about because I've already seen one side of it, but this is going to be for a more general audience that can work with a casual fan, essentially.
Now, your third movie is one that I am familiar with, and I've kind of been keeping a little bit of tabs on it. There's not a whole lot of information.
My third movie is by a small indie director by the name of Quentin Tarantino, and this is his new movie coming out late next year, I believe August, is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
August 9th.
Yes, I'm very excited. When I first heard about it, I wasn't sure. We've seen him over the top so much before. I know he's done period pieces before, in a sense, and he really embellished that world. But going back to like 1969, especially in Los Angeles, I think he'll get that.
It's about a faded TV actor and his stunt double. They kind of go to try and make a name for themselves in the film industry, but they try and do that in 1969 LA during the Helter Skelter Charles Manson era. The guy who's playing Charles Manson is also playing Charles Manson in a different movie. It's kind of funny.
Is he really?
Yeah, it's Dewey from Justified.
That's crazy. I love period pieces. I also love, I mean, you can tell with most of the movies. I think, let's see, that one took place in 1966 and this takes place in 1969, so you can see where my interests are going, at least within time frames. I'm stoked about this movie.
Tarantino has said that his films are kind of in the same universe. Like the Death Proof type movies, those ones are movies that characters within his universe would watch. So it'll be interesting to see if this is a movie set in his universe or if this is a movie set for the characters in his movie universe, as backwards as that sounds. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of movie he makes this, whether it be an over-the-top one like Death Proof, or something like Hateful Eight, where it's just gritty and there and present.
I loved Hateful Eight though. It's a long, long movie, but I really enjoyed it. I mean, that's with most of his movies though. But you just get sucked into those scenes, those monologues when they just get started going. In Hateful Eight, when they just start talking in the carriage when they're talking about the letter from the president. But still, that whole scene, you just get into it so much. I mean, even when they first get there at the cabin and you're starting to go through all the characters and learning everybody's name. I don't know. I just enjoy how he writes those characters in, and how a movie like that, everybody still gets their kind of due in some way. He always makes sure he goes above and beyond, so you don't feel cheated out with the storyline. That's one of the reasons why I loved Inglourious Basterds, and it's another reason why I love. I mean, Pulp Fiction is probably still my favorite. I never got into as much of Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. I still liked them from general movie aspect, but those weren't my favorites.
It'll be nice to see another one of his movies, because it has been a few years since Hateful Eight came out, especially in this era of, even in the last few years, the film industry has blown up to the point where if you don't have a franchise, or you're not trying to reboot or remake a previous franchise, it seems like you're not doing much. And so, especially to see him do something that seems like it's going to be a pretty big film, it's going to be cool to see how he presents that.
No, I know. He's still one of those guys that's still fighting the good fight. He's one of those guys that you'll go to the movie just to see that one movie. He's kind of like Martin Scorsese, where
You know his name, and then you know his movies.
yeah, but you always know what you're in for, at least in some bit of a way. Like, you know his directing style is going to jerk you around a whole lot.
I mean, we've got a big year ahead of us in movies in general, and I think if we can start to bring to light more of these movies that are going to kind of fly in under the radar, I think it will help promote that overall film industry standard. Coming out, the next thing we have is Glass on the 18th. That should be pretty awesome. I'm really excited for that. I'll need to rewatch Unbreakable and Split. We might see Aquaman come even closer to $1 billion worldwide in box office. It's currently sitting at 666 million, and it definitely has the potential, but I think it needs to hit that before Glass comes out, because Glass is going to steal a lot of its thunder, a lot of its waves. And then, of course, the great and fabulous Stan Lee. His birthday was on December 28th.
He would have been 96.
96. So, happy birthday.
Rest in peace,
and
good
we
sir.
hope you're resting in peace.
It still makes me sad. I did hear about the scene that he does in Into the Spider-Verse,
Oh, yeah.
and that's quite sad. But I think I might have shed a tear when I see that, because I think it's kind of touching. I won't spoil it for anybody, but anything else that you got coming up? Anything else that you want us to check out?
Mid-January is Deadly Class, a new show on Sci-Fi. That looks pretty good.
Yep, I saw the trailer for that. I know the first episode's up on Sci-Fi's website. If you people who want to see it now can actually go to just Sci-Fi's website and be able to watch the pilot episode. I know we have True Detective coming out next month as well too, which I'm really excited about. Hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more as it gets closer. I'd liked every other season before. I mean, I did really like the Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey season, the first one. I thought that was the best one so far, but I still like the Colin Farrell one as well too. I like those cop dramas like that. Those ones are really dark and gritty, and those stories are so good. I'm excited for that.
Well, with that being said, thank you for tuning in. As always, I am B. Frank.
And I'm Travis.
And we are worth the admission. See you next week.